enough to the top of the hour that we can get started. It looks like we've got an eager set of attendees all set to go. So let's start. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to Transition Town Kenmore's Council Candidate Forum on Sustainability for the Pullenvale Ward and Brisbane. My name is Charles Warringham, and as the coordinator of the Transition Town group here in Kenmore, I'm really pleased to welcome you all, make a few announcements, introduce our guests, and then hand over to our moderator for the evening. We are meeting, of course, on land of the Jagera and Turrbal people, and we pay our respects to local Indigenous leaders. And I think it's particularly appropriate that we recognise the knowledge and stewardship that allowed Indigenous Australians to sustain a culture over so many generations that avoided large-scale disruption of ecosystems, pollution, excessive resource use, or human-induced climate change. In other words, all of the costs that accompany the benefits that our contemporary society's prosperity and technology and complexity have brought along. In terms of just logistics, there are toilets in the hallway which you came through on your way to these rooms. In the unlikely event we need to evacuate, then there's a stairwell here, fire exit, and we assemble outside in the car park. I'd ask you also please just to check your mobile phones if you wouldn't mind, and just be sure that they're not going to ring embarrassingly in the middle of the proceedings. I just remember to do mine. Okay, there are really two parts to the evening. Once I have finished these announcements, candidates will have the opportunity to respond to 4 questions that we have provided in advance, and we'll rotate the order of answers. And then we'll move on to questions from the floor, and our request is, please, that questions be relevant, be fair to the candidates, brief, and please make them questions, not statements or speeches, which does occasionally happen in such forums. And then we'll finish with refreshments, and you'll have the opportunity to collar our candidates present tonight and discuss issues in greater depth with them. Now, we've invited along Kenmore State High School's Art and Media Department, through its head of department, Colin Stewart, to video record tonight's event so that it can be made available for anyone who can't be here this evening. So a very big thank you to Colin Stewart for his help, and a warm welcome, thanks Colin. And a warm welcome to Hayley Hazelwood over in the corner there. Hayley is a Year 12 film and TV student, and she's building up her media skills this evening. And I would only say that our professional journalist in the room needs to watch out, because I think she's after your job one day. Now, we're going to post a link to the recording on the Transition Town Facebook page sometime tomorrow. And I would ask that if any of you don't wish to appear in the video recording for any reason, we would ask you please, and I'll just ask our camera operators to indicate areas which will not be in view of the cameras. So towards the back there, so Colin's just indicating towards the back. So if there's anyone in that position, please feel free just to sit there so that you won't appear on the recording. And similarly, if there's anyone who wishes to ask a question but does not wish to have their audio recorded, what we can do is provide you with a card. You can write out your question, and then we can read that question out for the candidates.
Charles, what's the Facebook?
I don't have it at the moment. I'm sorry. We'll do it. Transition Town Kenmore. The Transition Town movement has its roots in the UK, and it's a network of hundreds of groups in over 50 countries. And they're all stepping up to try and address big challenges with local initiatives. And these take all kinds of different forms, from the profitable community-owned Bath and West Community Energy Group in the west of England, to Pasadena, California's Repair Cafe, the Crystal Palace Food Market in London, to the French village of Ungersheim, which has dozens of community projects based around sustainability, ranging from their local currency, which they rather charmingly call the radish, and to a horse-drawn school bus wagon, which serves the local primary school and takes students to school every day. So many, many different kinds of activities. Our Kenmore group started in 2008, and members participated in the development of the precursor to the mobile markets. We have monthly meetings with speakers tackling topics from the specific, practical, and local, such as how to secure your smartphone for safe reuse or recycling at Kenmore's e-waste facility, which we had recently, to the implications of the gig economy with UQ's Thomas Sigler, or at our last meeting, a video hookup with Rick Humphreys of the Granite Belt Sustainability Action Network in Stanthorpe, sharing ideas from that newly formed group's experience. This year, our group plans to develop at least one new practical community activity. And if you would like to be part of that, or hear about upcoming speakers, we would invite you please to sign up at the list on the table over towards the entrance. And if you give us your email address, we will include you in the monthly email to advise you of upcoming events. Before we go further, it's appropriate that I publicly disclose my own personal political affiliation, having been a 5-time candidate in state and federal elections, once as an independent and 4 times for the Greens. And as an office holder in the local branch, I openly acknowledge my personal support for our party's campaigns and candidates. But as I made clear to members of Transition Town when I was invited to take over from Lloyd Hamilton, who was a previous coordinator, Lloyd only here, last year, I fully respect the non-partisan character of the Transition Town group and will strive to function in that coordinator role impartially and fairly. And in tonight's context, the only vote that I am urging is one that's informed, considered, and reflects your values. Now, we also encourage everyone to engage directly with all candidates and campaigns. They're remarkably approachable. They love actually to talk to members of the public, so do take every opportunity when you do see them. And also we would invite and encourage you to attend the local bulletins candidate forum at the Carroll Centre Hall, OLR, on Monday the 23rd of March. We're pleased to see Barry Searle, head of the bulletin, here this evening. Now, tonight's forum was set up to give candidates an opportunity to have their say on the issues of sustainability that really are the core of the transition group's interests. Now, all 4 candidates, were notified of and invited to the event at the earliest opportunity, and all have acknowledged receipt of the invitation, and all have been provided with the same information about the forum at the same time. We made some decisions about how the forum should be conducted and advised all candidates of those. For example, we believe it would not really be fair to candidates who attend, and therefore open themselves up to your questions about their responses, to take time reading out statements from candidates not in attendance, who would not be putting themselves up to that kind of questioning. However, we did agree to make copies of any responses to the advance notice questions available for anyone in the audience to consult. Now, we have also kept invitations to the forum to participate right open until this evening. And earlier, Councillor Richards telephoned me, and she has advised that she is not available for tonight's event. And in speaking to me this afternoon, I have agreed to read part of a statement from her this evening, a full copy of which will be available on the table over on the far side. Now, in keeping with our requirement not to read out full statements, I'm going to get to the pertinent part, which is her non-attendance at the event this evening. So this is from Kate Richards this afternoon. As the community is aware, allegations have been made in the media to which the media has continued messaging. Under direction from my lawyers, I am unable to attend tonight's moderated forum, yet want to put on the record the very important value that Transition Australia and that of Transition Town Kenmore provide to our communities. As your local councillor, I have got on with doing my job and committed to continuing the hard work with integrity to deliver for my community of the Pullenvale ward. Should any guests tonight have questions, I would be more than happy to respond via the Chair of Transition Town Kenmore. Again, I want to put on record the value Transition Australia's vision of inspiring, connecting and supporting groups to build localised, sustainable and a just future, as does Brisbane City Council, as we recognise that while climate change is a global issue that requires a global response, local governments have an important role to play. Councils must take action to reduce their operational impact and help residents and businesses to do the same. Council has been a leader in sustainability practices for more than 20 years and continues to invest significantly in measures which aim to both mitigate and adapt to the potential impacts of a changing climate, including the following. And from that point, Councillor Richards has provided quite an extensive list of dot points on various activities that the Brisbane City Council has undertaken. I'll just cite a couple just to give you the flavour. The purchase of 100% renewable energy between July 2010 and June 2016, in addition to offsetting emissions from all fuel used by Council. Council also working to achieve 50% shade cover for footpaths and bikeways in residential areas by 2031. To assist in achieving this target, Council's Neighbourhood Shadeways programme focuses on planting new trees in centres, growth nodes along selected public transport corridors and residential areas identified with less than 30% tree cover by suburb. Council developed flood modelling, sea level rise, river and estuarine flooding and overland flow for the entire local government area, and currently funds the Flood Resilient Homes programme in partnership with CitySmart. This programme helps residents prepare for, live through and recover from the impacts of flooding with the least amount of disruption. Council also offers financial assistance for eligible homes. So I don't propose to read the list, it's a very extensive one, but this list is going to be on the table at the conclusion of the questions for anyone to read additional points that Councillor Richards prepared. As of this evening, we have not actually had a response from Greg Adaman, the LNP candidate, so obviously he's not with us this evening. Now finally, this election is taking place against the backdrop of the coronavirus epidemic. Queensland Health is advising as of today that public events proceed as normal, and the Electoral Commission has made it clear that there will be no changes to the conduct of the poll. However, we need to be, I think, cognizant of the fact that by the time polling day arrives, the situation may have moved on, and there may be a somewhat more serious public health situation. So I just wanted to remind everyone in the group that there are opportunities to not have to go and join the queue on polling day and still have your say. And pre-polling commences this coming Monday, the 16th, and the ECQ website contains information about where you can cast your vote for pre-polling. So you can avoid the queues and get in early. And secondly, of course, there is an option for a postal ballot, which can be requested by visiting the ECQ website and choosing an option for an online request, downloading an application form, etc. However, please be aware that this coming Monday, March the 16th at 7 p.m. is the deadline for the Commission to receive requests for postal ballots. So if that is your preferred option, and you wish to not necessarily attend on polling day, please act quickly so that you can secure your postal ballot in good time. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce the candidates present here this evening. Jordan Mark for the ALP. Charles Druckmann for the Greens. And note the candidacies of Kate Richards, Independent, and Greg Adaman of the LNP. Welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. And now I'm going to turn the evening over to our other guest, Brendan O'Malley, a journalist with Quest Newspapers, who for a good part of his, I think he said 29-odd year career, was spent with the Courier Mail. He's written extensively on local issues in the West Side News. And thank you all very much for your attendance, and we hope you enjoy the evening and learn a lot from it and help cast your vote as the way you want it to be cast in this election. Thank you.
So before we start tonight, I'll also make a disclaimer, not that I feel that I ought to.
People can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Is that a bit better?
The person in the back row.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me up in the back row? So I'll also make a disclaimer at the start, as Charles has done as well, although I don't feel I really ought to. It has been said on social media that I'm quite heavily embedded in the Greens. Now, it is the fact that the mother of my child is Senator Larissa Waters, who's the Greens Senator for Queensland. We split up 7 years ago. I won't be defined by a former partner from 7 years ago. More importantly, it should be noted that I've never been a member of the Greens or indeed any other party. I've never done any paid work or any unpaid work for any political party, including the Greens. So I just wanted to make that clear at the start. When we do get to the questions, if people could clearly state their name, and the first question we will, so that we can, all questions get fair, or we can move it around, we'll limit the time of discussion for that to 4 minutes, which will be timed, and then the subsequent questions 3 minutes. And as Charles has also said, if the questions could be questions, as we know from Q&A, we don't want statements. A short, clear question and just one question would be appreciated. Thanks very much. Oh, sorry, 5 minutes for the first question. My apologies.
you like to read the question?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so for our first question, we might start with, do you want to go first?
Oh, we flipped a coin.
Oh, okay, yep, okay, no worries. You can't ask more democratic than that. So why have you chosen to run for council, and what are you hoping to achieve in terms of sustainability for the Pullenvale ward and for Brisbane?
Good evening, everybody. This is pretty easy. Climate change, climate change, climate change, climate change. That is why I'm running for this particular ward. And that's because I feel that politics is letting us down and not listening to expert advice. So my journey for how I ended up here started in grade 9. In grade 9, I had an assignment with my geography teacher to design a sustainable home. And when I designed it, I was really pleased with the outcome. I thought, wow, you can really reduce the energy usage of a home or the water usage and amongst other things. And so I asked my teacher, I said, why do we not do this for every new home? Why does every new home not have all these features involved? And she said to me, well, if you wanted to change that, what you'd need to do is you'd need to change the building code or the planning code. And urban planners do that. So I thought to myself, geez, I want to become an urban planner, because if I become an urban planner, I can change these seemingly small policies and make a huge impact for everything new that comes in place. And so I packed my bags, became an urban planner. And what did I find when I became an urban planner? I found politics gets in the way of everything. It's really unfortunate. You can make recommendations that are astoundingly obvious and they will neglect it. And climate change is one of those, flooding is one of those. I saw when I worked in natural hazard resilience that essentially people would put a recommendation not to build in a flood zone to the government, and they'd go, to be honest, not too bothered. It's not likely to happen in our election term. So they didn't put that legislation in place. So what I found was pretty discouraging. And I thought, what more can I do? We're in a climate emergency. What can I do to change politics as the barrier for experts being listened to? I can run for politics. That's what I can do. So I'm standing here before you because we're in a climate emergency. All the actions for climate change, which will be discussed from the next question, I believe, they're going to benefit everyone's lives anyway. And all the experts are telling us we should do this. So my motivations are simple: climate change action. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jordan, and I'm running because I want to make a real difference. Now, I really relate with what you said, Charles. I grew up with my father being a professor at UQ, my mother is a state school teacher, and I learned that sometimes you can make differences as an expert in small ways, but I've always known that if I truly want to make an impact, I've got, because what I care about is climate change, transparency, reforms, good economics, and environmental protection. This is done largely by the federal, state, and local governments. So I've been interested ever since I was very young. I went to university. I began studying economics and political sciences. But I really wanted to be involved straight off the bat. So leaving high school, when I was 17, I actually approached our local state member, Dr. Christian Rowan, for some work experience in his office. I was doing partisan at the time. I wanted the experience and I really appreciated it. I actually read the infrastructure plans. I actually read the proposals to bus congestion and the environmental proposals. Now, I also learned that a lot was lacking. However, it was a very good experience and I appreciate it very much. I would recommend it to anyone. I was then, through this, nominated to join the Queensland Youth Parliament representing Mogul. And I was very glad for this. I met young people from all across the state, from every different area, bringing with them their own ideals. I met graduates, I met lawyers, I met the young leaders of the UN Youth here in Queensland. And I was very lucky. In a few months, I was elected Youth Minister of Science, and then this cohort elected me as their Youth Premier. And I was given a real opportunity. I'd ascended to the Youth Parliament. I could address the opposition leader here in Queensland. I addressed Parliament as a young person with concerns. However, I knew that if I really wanted to make a difference, and this is what I learned from being youth premier, I actually have to join with the institutions which are the lawmakers to make sure that experts like my dad are listened to. Now, I was very impressed with the University Young Labour, so I thought they were a driving force for real change. I joined them. I would go out on my weekends to Brackenridge, to Deegan. I would go to Pullenvale, having discussions with people all across the city about what they care about climate change, about council transparency, about good economics, and about environmental protection. I talked with young people, pensioners, workers, and community groups. Eventually, I was actually working with Patrick Condren and the deputy opposition leader on council, Jared Cassidy. And after a while, they asked if I would run in Pullenvale in any capacity I wanted, and initially I said no. I said, why on earth would you want me to run for council? I had fears about the spread of rumours and all kinds of concerns. But when I went back to Pullenvale, talked with my friends, talked with my friends in Labour, when I talked to older people as well, I was actually encouraged to run. There were a lot of people who said, no, we need somebody like you to actually stand up and run for once. And so because of this, even though I did not have the no business experience, it really stuck with me when Bruce Flegg once said, the people of Moggle want no change. We live in Pullenvale inside that. I don't agree with that. And I realised that there was a massive appetite for change. So that's why I'm running for council.
Before we go on to the next question, if I could just say, Jordan, very well spoken. Just in that's what makes democracy work. Just ordinary people, like the people in front of me, just getting up and having a go. It really is a hard slog, and I've watched political campaigns for several decades. It is an incredibly hard slog being a candidate. In most cases, you've got to put your hand into your own pocket. It's not reimbursed. And if you take it seriously, it's an awful lot of work, and in most cases, you've got to give up your job. So this is what makes our democracy function, everybody having a go. So well done, you. Now going on to our second question. Climate change is an international problem, and many cities around the world are enacting policies in response. What do you think Brisbane City Council should do?
No.
Well, naturally, climate change, as I said, it's on my agenda. We have a huge opportunity with Brisbane City Council. It has a $3.2 billion budget. It's the largest local council in Australia. It's got a population bigger than Tasmania, bigger than the Northern Territory. And what Brisbane does ripples around our state. And our opportunity is huge, it's immense. It's through waste management, it's through sustainable building design, it's through adaptation to the increasing frequency and intensity of natural hazards. And it's also through transportation. So these four things are four pillars of how we can tackle climate change through our city council. And all up, they tend to represent about 47% of the emissions from a city. So it's quite significant. These are also things like building materials. So what do these mean? Well, waste management. That's about things like composting, which is about 4% of our city's emissions. If we do composting, which the Greens are already doing, and I'm going to talk about it in the third question, so I'll not expand on that one too much. That'll help climate action. At the same time, this is about sustainable building design. Sustainable building design is ventilation, it's aspect, it's natural light, it's all these different little things that add up to energy reduction costs. They save on power bills for people, and they take climate action through reducing our energy usage. It's not just waste management, it's not just sustainable building design, it's transportation. It needs to be electrified, it needs to be active transport supported. And we have more opportunities coming with things like e-bikes coming through. And finally, it's adaptation and mitigation of the increasing frequency and intensity of natural hazards. So I did allude to it earlier, but we do build in flood zones. It's not just those things though as well, or the physical elements. It's also the social capital and social structures. I'm not sure if everyone's so aware, but when I worked in natural hazard resilience, the key to it is actually social constructed elements. It's the social capital. It's people being bonded together. And we recovered really well from the floods because we actually stood together. We felt confident we could get back on our feet. If you compare that to somewhere like Hurricane Katrina overseas, you'll find they never got to build back. They didn't have the same social capital built in, and the places that did build back actually had social capital. But I'll reiterate, climate action is exactly what council can do, and it benefits your life immensely. Through sustainable building design, it's through waste management, it's through adaptation to the increasing frequency and intensity of hazards, and it's also transportation. Thank you very much.
So when it comes to the issue of council addressing climate change, as it absolutely should, I see this in two parts. The first part, I see a lack of integrity in council prioritising short-term gain over long-term prosperity, and the second way, I see no real platform to actually implement this. So I'll start off. I see a lack of integrity as the main reason we've seen the current decision-making that we have from council. We have seen a lack of integrity manifests itself in the Logan City Council and the Ipswich City Council in terms of eventuating in corruption scandals. I believe we've also seen this in our ward with new development outpacing transport infrastructure and the necessary environmental protections to make sure new development is sustainable. However, on the topic of climate change, I'm very happy to be running on a platform which states it will be putting just under $30 million if a Labour council is elected to make Brisbane carbon neutral by 2050. Spent in 100 days. I'm very happy to be part of that. And this isn't only just about making council carbon neutral by buying credits from overseas. This is actually about making sure council's emissions are carbon neutral by 2050. And the ways this is going to be done is through a review searching into improved public transport, which of course reduces emissions, building electric vehicle infrastructure. Actually, we have a hybrid car at home, and I can assure you it's fantastic. And my family talks about getting Teslas all the time. They are definitely the future. I was just reading the other day in Norway, just under, I think it was 47% of all new registered cars in Norway are fully electric. This is what we need to be preparing for. And finally, I completely agree there needs to be an alignment of land use and transport planning. So, that's our platform to address climate change.
Now, the third question, I think, is something that everybody can relate to, including myself. I was really worried coming here tonight with the rain that I might actually be late because, you know, coming along the Western Freeway, Moggle Road, who knows what could happen. So our third question to you candidates is this. This ward is highly dependent on private vehicles. Our single arterial road is subject to congestion, exacerbated by centralisation of commercial premises, employment opportunities, and a cluster of educational institutions to our east. What will you do to find long-term solutions?
Thank you very much. So, naturally, there are multiple causes that are leading to this. We have the expansion of Kenmore State High School. We have the fact that it is our only main way in and out of the ward. Now, this year in Queensland, we've seen the development of 8 new state schools. Obviously, down the line, there will need to be a secondary school further out west. Now, I think this is something we'll need to prepare for, but there are also ways of making our current infrastructure work better by just removing cars
people
off the
down the
road.
back here, what you're saying?
Oh, sorry, can you hear me down the back? Alright, that's good.
Excuse me, this is a state issue, not a council issue.
Well, actually, I mean, of course, council controls local roads. When councils make...
Yeah, but main infrastructure roads are
If we take
Can we take questions at the end? Thank you.
If we take cars off the road, if we take cars off the road by investing in better public transport, we make our state infrastructure better. This is what happens this is why we have buses largely, to reduce congestion. This is what I'm talking about. Buses are a council issue. Now, we actually need serious improvement to our buses here in the Pullenvale ward. I've heard so much that the 443 needs to have its times extended. There actually needs to be a way for people to get in and out of Corona Downs better, especially young people who can't afford a car. Now, another one, personally, I remember wanting to ride my bike to Kenmore State High School. But I had my parents, and I was younger, and they said, no, we don't want you riding your bike on Moggle Road. There's no bike path. I actually think that we should start to investigate whether, and I believe the Greens also did look into this, putting a bike path from Pullenvale to Kenmore. So not just Pullenvale, Balbarry to Kenmore. And then you would have a continuous strip that would allow people to ride their bikes into Kenmore, including school students, without the risk of going on Mongrel Road. And I believe that would take a lot of cars off the road and reduce the stress on our infrastructure, such as the Kenmore roundabout. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I will echo a lot of these points here. I will agree. So for me, it's actually a strange tendency that these questions, the answers for these questions for me, have 4 parts to them. And this one has 4 parts. We have one thing around transportation and access, which is focusing on where we place our development. So that could be something like a school. And it doesn't necessarily have to focus on schools, but it is about reducing the distance that we travel. If I say, people usually think of transport, they think of getting A to B. It's not about getting A to B, it's about getting whatever A or B offers you and getting back from there. So if you can move these close to each other, look at all that traffic you've removed in the distance. And that's what satellite cities are about. So we can learn a lot from the models in urban planning around satellite cities, about how we plan our schools. And maybe it isn't the school that we offer at local council, but it could be the fact that we set up for a school, that we prime our transport around that. Now I'm going to emphasize 3 other points, but I wanted to do something first. There's 3 other areas. One are the little things. The other one are the mega projects. And the third is public transport. And I think we all agree, as Jordan said, that Corunna Downs has been neglected in public transport. It's completely abysmal. They've done surveys, but they've done nothing with them. That's usually what they do with consultation. They do nothing. They make empty promises about, we'll fix roads. They talk about Kenmore Roundabout, fixing traffic somehow. And I'll tell you this, I'm an urban planner. I have read books that tell you that roundabouts are usually the most effective traffic manager. I will enjoy that debate if they want to bring that on. And it's not 25 million worth. But it's the little things that are going to have more impact than that, more than slogans. It's the barriers to active transport. It might be a barrier from going on, if everyone thinks about Morgul Road as an example, and if you get off at Kenmore Shops near Woolies and you go down through that little park to Akuna Oval, if you walk down that park, you'll be fine. But if you cycle down that little park, there's a little barrier there of a tree with a lot of leaves shed. It's actually it's pretty crummy for a bike rider to go through. And it's got an amazing pathway to the city after that. But small barriers make people feel very uncomfortable with active transport. But removing that, or giving a bus shelter, a proper shelter at a bus stop, can make someone go, hey, I don't feel really hot sitting in the sun. And it's not very it's not very big in the cost, but it's significant and it adds up, all these little things. And at the same time, it's all the large things. So it's one large thing. So our side of town doesn't just have a whole set of suburbs which are absent of public transport. We also are the only ward, or one of only 2 wards, that don't have a busway or a train out here. And I appreciate the trains are also a state issue, but we're building a bridge at Balbarry with the current plan. And to be honest, maybe this could be train. I'm not saying that that is the answer, but what I'm saying is we need to actually explore what options will suit our area. We need to have a proper investigation of what the impacts will be first. We don't want to just go out here and say, we're going to fix it with a roundabout, go do a roundabout. We want to actually do traffic modelling first. We want to survey people's uses of transport and where they go, their travel behaviours. So overall, one day we're going to have a big project. I'm not saying it's the bridge. It could even be something like a train from Taringa Underground. But I wanted to express that we do need a mega project out here, even though I hate them generally. We need all these little things, like bus shelters and active transport links. And we need to start thinking about where we place our city, where we place a development in our city. And that could be a school. And at the same time, the last little one, no, don't worry, not enough time. But if you ask me any questions later, we'll explain. Thanks so very much there.
Now we have one last set question for the evening. Brisbane City Council is the largest municipal council in the nation. Given this, BCC could become a leader in the establishment of waste reduction and recovery strategies, and some of you would have seen that there's been a bit of talk about that during the campaign so far from the leaders. What is your view, though, of the leadership council could take on this issue?
When I was young, I was really privileged to spend a little bit of time in Switzerland. And I will tell you that their waste collection is just outstanding. They have about 8 different bins, if I remember. One for glass, aluminium, plastics, organic waste. And what you do is that you actually get the citizens to self-organise their waste. Now, this is not a current proposal that I believe is in any of the major parties, I believe. However, this is actually what I am personally looking to go towards. Now, in Victoria, in the state government, I've been impressed by a certain part in this direction. You had different bins for the glass and aluminium, if I remember correctly. There were 4 bins instead of just the recycling and the waste and the green bins that we currently have. So I believe as we move to a more sustainable city in terms of waste collection, it'll be a matter of citizens changing a little bit of that mindset, getting citizens to help organise waste. But what this means is that we won't need to ship it off in the tons to third world countries to go and disassemble or burn. We will actually be able to reuse that in our local economy, and I think that's what we should be working for in the long run. Thank you.
Now we come to questions. Sorry, I was too eager to get to questions from the floor. My apologies.
It's alright, I already talked a bit about it. So, waste management. I have 4 areas for this one as well, I will admit. It's a little repetitive, strangely. But waste management for us in the Greens, we already have 2 policies we've put up for it very clearly. One is around green bins. We want a green bin to be accessed for free. Currently people pay over $80 for a green bin, and they're doing something good. We shouldn't we shouldn't have barriers for people to do good things. We should be promoting the opportunity to do it. And council actually makes money off those green bins. I don't think that's right. People doing the right thing and council making money off it. So the green bins are one thing we're committed to. Another one is dump vouchers to go directly to renters. So I'm not sure if anyone has seen it in this room, but there was a poll with ABC recently. 93% of people supported dump vouchers not going to the owner of the residence, but actually to the person who lived there. And it makes sense, it's simple. And I can say, thankfully, the LNP looks like they're going to adopt that. So we don't even have to get in to get some of these through, it seems. And there's 2 more areas that I personally feel passionately towards in waste. One is waste around plastics. When I go to doors, I often hear people say, plastic waste is absurd. They say climate action and they say transportation lots, but they also say, we use too much single-wrap plastic. And other countries around the world, and other cities around the world pioneered this, pioneered removal of some of these plastics in use. Places like France removed cutlery that was plastic. Portugal, plastic wrapping was removed. They banned it. In Canada, they're looking to ban more, and same with China. If other places can do it around the world, and there's all cheaper alternatives, why are we not looking at how we can do it here? And one thing that's very cool that we can do is offer people platforms and spaces to do the right thing. And this can be through a new community centre. So a lot of you are probably aware, I'm very much for a new community centre in our ward, at least one. And this community centre can house groups like eWaste Connect. And what do these groups do? They recycle e-waste. But what else can they do? They can take things like our bottle caps, I'm not sure if there's any around, but our bottle caps, and turn them into 3D printing ink. That's pretty amazing. They can even use that 3D printing ink to make more printers and more products. This is one of the hardest things to dispose of, plastics, and people can utilize certain types of it. I think that's amazing. We have an opportunity for our community to do the right thing by simply just giving them the spaces to do it. So there's 4 areas for waste management that I'm advocating for. One is dump vouchers to go directly to the renters or the occupiers of a property. 2 is a green bin for free to every household, because 40% of our current waste bins, our general waste, that's the red ones, those are green waste. That's green waste, that 40%. and that could be going into composting. I'm also advocating for us to explore what plastics we can replace affordably. And finally, I'm advocating for a new community centre in our ward that can also have good recycling facilities there. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. So we now come to questions from the floor. My apologies. We'll have a microphone going around. Who's volunteering to take that around, Charles? You? Just so that everybody can hear the question. Now, if we could just remind people, it does need to be a question, and if you could keep it short and sharp, the candidates will each get...
I can ask a question without a microphone. I've heard a lot of stories here tonight. What are you going to do about reducing rates? My name's Barry, sir.
I know who you are, Barry. Can I just finish here, please? Thank you. So both candidates will get a chance to answer the question. I was just going to finish up by saying we'll have a lot more questions, so Barry can ask as many as he likes. Unfortunately, we've only got, as we can see, 2 of the candidates here, but that means that you good people get to ask a lot more. Barry.
Okay, so spend, sounds great. I don't need a microphone. What are you going to do about reducing rates? I address the question to both candidates. I think everyone here would like to hear what you say about that, because that's what we're interested in.
Great. I'm actually really proud of this policy, and you might really like it, Barry, because if we stop spending so much money on advertising with leaflets, it is the Labour Party's platform that without this spending we have costed, we can reduce annual rates by an average of $100. So there you go. And look, I don't think I need to be any more clear than that.
Slight contrast. I don't want to increase rates, but I also don't want to decrease rates, because I think we can just use what we have more efficiently. I agree that some of the things that we're spending money on at the moment are completely wasteful. We spend time and money advertising our politicians on radio and in pamphlets and flyers all around the place. I don't think that's acceptable to anybody. And I definitely am behind the element that there's a lot of wasted money around. Can't help but support that. Generally speaking, we need to reallocate the money we have, no interest in reducing our rates, and we can also raise funds of poor behaviour from certain groups.
Yeah, the gentleman in the over there with his hand up.
Tell us your name.
Yes, I'm Dennis Bright. I've lived in the electorate for about 20 years. I also write for Australian Independent Media Network, which operates from Google. I have many recent articles that. Now, my question is related to rates, and I thank Barry for raising the issue of rates there in the first question, because it is a very important question. My question relates to improving the financial governance capacity of our rate structures.
Can you bite the microphone?
Yes, sorry, I'm not. To improve the governance capacity of our rate structures in support of the transition town initiatives. I completely support those, and I think we could get further with a careful reform of the existing rate structures to contribute to sustainability. We have over 80 rate structures in Brisbane.
You need to ask a question.
And are you aware of the possibilities of reviewing the current complex rate structures so that local businesses have a little bit more relief compared with the big projects in the CBD and the big shopping centres, which are generating so much traffic movement? If we could fine-tune the rate structures.
Could I stop you there? I think we've got the gist of it. So, candidates.
Well, I will agree that there is some things we can do. So those are things around infrastructure charges, more so. But at the same time, The Greens are proposing a vacancy levy. And what that means is if people are intentionally leaving shops vacant, if a landlord is, so not the small businesses, but if the landlord is intentionally leaving a shop vacant, they will have to pay a charge. And that's because currently there's a financial incentive for some landlords who want to have a high debt ratio for their land through a high valuation of their property to actually leave certain stores vacant. Now I know it sounds it sounds bewildering to think that someone can actually profit off that. And it's not just through negative gearing, it's actually through things like valuations of the property. So we have a shop further out in our ward where this occurs, and they can have a high valuation if they have a high yield for each individual shop and less shops occupied. And that allows them to take more money out and put it invested elsewhere. So I think that that's an area where we can generate more rates from them through a levy, and at the same time, we can also make them drive down their prices of commercial real estate. And if they do that, we'll get more people and more foot traffic in our local economy. And then at the same time, we have 3 more policies around that, but I will ramble on too much for that. But in case they can't find anyone, we do have 3 policies if you want to ask those questions.
Thank you, Dennis, for your question. As I was saying before, I've been doing a lot of door knocking this year in Deegan, Brackenridge, all around the city. Sorry, my bad. I'll try and be more direct. Thank you. And I have noticed that it is, whereas in Pullenvale we like to care about our environment, oftentimes in other parts of the city it's a matter of, can we pay the bills, especially for small businesses. And we have to be especially concerned with a possible recession coming up. From an economics perspective, I completely agree with Charles. It's a market distortion to have people valuing their shopping places high by leaving shops vacant. It is honestly, I believe that it's immoral. I believe it is fundamentally immoral to be doing it. Now, if you want to review into the way that the rate structures are done, now, I must be honest, I have never paid rates, and I'll have to be honest. But I will look into that. I have heard many other people with similar concerns when I've been door knocking in other parts of Brisbane, so I will look into that.
The lady in the blue there, please.
Which one? The first
Yes, yeah.
one? When you use this thing, these cheap ones don't work if you hold them down there. We can't tell what's going on, even if you shout like me. But you've got to go through them and just about eat them.
Thanks. Maria Heenan, given how much we all care about sustainability and we value our environment and our habitat in this area, I'd like to ask Charles and Jordan, if you're elected, would you fight against any development on Pullenvale Reserve?
I have come out with a position against development I will be much louder, please forgive me. I have come out with a position against development on Pullenvale Recreation Reserve. I think there are very large concerns regarding, louder still, sorry. Has it changed over time, or is it just, have I got quiet?
I think it's going flat.
Oh, okay, well, I'll just try and speak louder. So I have serious concerns regarding, because it's been marked as, it's been marked by the Australian Koala Foundation as vital habitat. There are also concerns with Indigenous burial sites, if I remember correctly. Because of this, I have come out against the development. However, I also actually went out this morning to the men's shed, where the Bridge Club, the men's shed, the UA's facilities currently are. I recognise the fact that we need to have a new community centre in the ward, and possibly even, so definitely one in the east of our ward, potentially later on one in the west, so I agree with Charles. However, I have ruled out Pullenvale Recreation Reserve. I think it's too valuable to even consider. I really do, and just on the note, if other parties wish to come out with consultations processes in where they're considering placing a new ward, I do respect that as position. I would just recommend that we actually can see some of these consultation processes. I'd like to find out more about what that would actually entail. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, geez, it really has gone soft. Okay. So I expected this question, I will admit. I am advocating very strongly for a new community centre in our ward, at least one new community centre in our ward. And I would like to flag that the site near Pullenvale Recreational Reserve already has zoning changes there. Currently it's zoned for parks. So it's not going to get a development approval in the current rules, not a new one. So it's unlikely to get actual development approval there in the future unless there's an extension of the existing ones. But what I want to do...
Sorry, can you elaborate on that? Unless there's an extension to the existing ones?
So there's an existing development approval on the site, and you could use that as a precedent to try to get a future one sometimes. Though usually those cases are a bit more murky and very costly to go through. But what I would like to express with this though, is even if I am not going to outright rule something out, I'm doing that on a particular value I have, and I actually genuinely value community consultation around absolutely everything possible. So I've already consulted a lot of different community groups around new community centres and all this type of thing. And one rule is, even if I completely disagree with something, I should make sure that I consult with everybody first. So I'm not advocating for a position to place it there. What I'm advocating for is to consult the community always on everything we can, and not just make decisions for the community. Thank you very much.
The gentleman in the grey jacket.
Gentleman in the
My name is Simon English. I've been in community for nearly 20 years. Gentlemen, this question's a bit more futuristic looking. From a Kenmore and Chapel Hill perspective, we have a lot of solar, and we're going to have a lot more solar, which creates an excess amount of energy in the community effectively. Ultimately, that will become very cheap energy. So what opportunities do you see in the local community to take advantage of this excess renewable energy?
Look, as a councillor, I will be restricted to what kinds of large energy infrastructure projects we can bring through. However, I would like to give an idea of what I have seen and really proposed. Now, batteries are becoming ridiculously cheaper over time. We have seen the price of lithium-ion and new forms of energy get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And what I'd really like to see, eventually, what we would be moving to, is subgrids, where in the case of an energy blackout, you would be able to essentially have microgrids with small batteries at the end of nodes. And this would mean, in the case of emergencies, we could have excess power saved in this battery system. But it's also, there's a real economic advantage to this, because you see, if we have an excess of power during the day, and then if there's demand in power when everybody goes home, so they're turning on their appliances, we can actually then sell that power later in the day for a profit once we have the initial battery infrastructure. So this is what I'll be looking forward in the long term. I haven't explored this, however, as a councillor. I hope you understand. Thank you.
It's an interesting one. I guess there's a lot of opportunity around microgrids, I would assume, though I admit I'm not an expert on this. Something I am advocating for that probably would feed into that system and that excess energy production would actually be to activate our existing rooftops. So currently, not everybody has solar on their roofs, and usually it's renters that don't get solar on their roofs. They're not getting it because there's no incentive for a landlord to put it on there. What I think we could look at is something like France, where they're actually making it so all new developments have solar panels on roofs. And council could even fund that up front. Obviously, you'd have exemptions on heritage and particular types of slope on the roof or other uses. However, every possible roof would offer a lot more energy for the grid. And it would be particularly advantageous if we can actually capitalize on that and use council money to fund the upfront cost of that. And council will reap the money back at the same rate someone would be paying electricity. And that's very easy to track, because currently, I don't know if any of you have solar panels, but my system tells me how much money I've saved from solar panels every day. So you can just track it utilizing that, plug that into our network, know exactly how much we're saving on solar panels, and people pay that much towards the solar panel repayment rate. Everyone wins out. Council gets its money back, everyone has solar panels on the roof, and I think we can tap that into a microgrid potential in the future for electricity. I know it's a little bit more nuanced than that, but trying to keep it brief.
Pullenvale. I've been a resident in this area for about 13 years now. I think my question is particularly to Jordan, I'm afraid. We're talking, you say a great deal about sustainability, which is attractive to me. On the other hand, I constantly find myself meeting with members of the ALP who are constantly apologising to me about the climate policies of the ALP. When we have the national, leader of the ALP saying that coal has a long-term future. Now, if we're going to go for zero carbon, within by 2050,
Excuse
which
me,
I think.
Jennifer, can I just remind you, it needs to be a question, so what's your question?
Okay. How do you reconcile your particular commitment to sustainability with the overall policy of the ALP in support of coal mining?
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Now, the first thing is to recognise is that when we talk about parties of coal mining, of the two major parties, there's one that actively goes out and subsidises and wants to subsidise projects like Adani and additional mining and opens up reserves. And then for the other party, it's much more moderated on the ALP. But I will say, there is genuine concern, and I'm one of those people who have concerns about this policy. But the ALP is a broad church for people all across Queensland, and I'm very proud to be part of Young Labour, where internally we are pushing for more action on climate change, because I'll tell you that as a young person, I'm invested in this. I will live the realities of climate change. I am not going to just sit around. Actually, partly one of the reasons I joined the Labour Party, one of the reasons I'm running tonight, is because I want to ensure myself and for my fellow young people in the room that we will have a policy and a vision that actually fights climate change into the future. For the City Council, with our promises to for $27.5 million in order to make City Council carbon neutral by 2050. I'll be middle-aged. I will be working, so I'm very happy to be running with that for the Labour in City Council. Thank you.
The lady with the red glasses and the brown head in the back.
Which one? The one in front of
Yeah, with the arm up and the like jump.
Hi, thank you. My name is Michelle. We've heard a lot tonight about transparency and accountability, which is fantastic. It's a vital part of any healthy democracy. We've seen recently in Brisbane City Council chambers where councillors from LNP and ALP have had to recuse themselves from chambers for conflict of interests. We've only had a Greens councillor and an independent remain in chambers to make those votes. How would you avoid that conflict of interest in the future? Both.
I'll go first. Thank you very much for your question. Look, this is my biggest issue running for council. It is with transparency. The two councillors, I remember you have the Greens councillor, Jonathan Treat. He's a young guy, just like me, a little bit older. He does not own businesses and such things, so there is no way he would ever be caught up for this. He lives in a share house, and I respect that, I really do. As a young person, I have no conflicts of interest. My campaign account has been $0 still in the weeks I've been campaigning. I am actually going to council to be a young person, to stand up for integrity. As I was talking earlier, as I was talking about transparency, one of the reasons I'm happy to be running with Labour is that we actually are running on a platform of stop the rorts, ending some of these allowances that go to the Lord Mayor, for example. I'm running as a young person, and I will fight for integrity in council, and I will scrutinise integrity on council on whatever side that is. However, I personally believe that it is an absolute priority. This is why I'm running. I'm running to be a candidate with integrity. Thank you.
Thankfully, we have a policy for this in the Greens. We have a policy not to take corporate donations in our party. So we don't get those influences from big mining companies, from anybody else that's going to pressure us. So it's pretty easy. Ban political donations from corporations. Simple. At the same time, I don't have any conflicts of interest. It's going to be pretty easy to vote on everything for me there. Thank you very much.
Gardner, live in the local area for about 13 years too. Both of you have spoken a bit about one aspect of the City Council, which is that it's a provider of services. It provides roads and rubbish removal and services to the community, but this council also has a huge amount of money. When you say the council is going to become a zero carbon council, that's the same thing as the coal mines in New South Wales saying they're zero carbon emitters because they're offsetting the trucks by planting trees, and they claim that. So can both of you please speak a little bit to the other side of the issue, not in terms of the council delivery of services becoming carbon neutral, but the council policy leadership making the city carbon neutral, which is a much bigger problem.
Thank you very much for your question. As I elicited before, I hope I elicited, it's not our policy just to make council services carbon neutral by 2050. It's our plan to make the city carbon neutral by 2050. The complete city.
23 million.
This is Labour Party policy, and what we are also doing. I'm completely serious. This is it's starting off in the first 4 years with $27.5 million being allocated in the first 100 days for the initial projects. And as part of this, none will be offset as the current council is doing, although for every $4 they've spent on advertising, they've only spent $1 on carbon offsets. What we will be doing is actually reducing the emissions of the city to net zero by 2050, and this is part of why I'm running as a candidate, because I want to see that. Thank you.
Question, which I think is quite relevant. She said,
just a single word. How?
Look, this happens in so many ways. I mean, the Greens, for example, would often say, I've heard before, for some people 2050 is too unrealistic, for some 2050 is too little low. Personally, I think because you're getting criticism from both sides, I think it's quite a measured amount. Look, this happens in so many ways. As I was talking before, electric cars now in Norway are making up 47 of all new registered cars. We are going to be seeing a massive change. I have a hybrid in my home as well. I understand these changes are happening. As we were talking about solar panels, we have an excess. We're now having excess power, as you were explaining before. I mean, we are already seeing these transitions. Our emissions have dropped before under the Gillard government with the carbon tax, and which with the Greens were also party to that policy. I mean, we have seen emissions drop. It is not a dream to say that we can get the city net zero by 2050. It's a very realistic plan. Thank you.
I will admit that some things are free and cost effective. Some things are the sustainable building design codes. Those won't cost money. At the same time though, I probably do feel that's a little small of an allocation. And that's because I know that of the 4 things we're looking at, in the group that I'm looking at, waste management, sustainable building design, transportation, and adaptation, adaptation actually costs a lot of money up front. It saves you money in the long run, but if we went for the Queensland floods as an example, which I worked on some flood inquiry work for, in 2011, if we invested the money up front, it would have been billions of dollars. That would have saved us tens of billions of dollars. But that is a lot of upfront money. It saves us money, but it is an investment we have to make, so I'm not sure about that particular element, but maybe we're not talking about adaptation necessarily. Transportation does cost money to get more routes in place. Bus routes sometimes can cost $7 to $8 million to have them if you're fully subsidising them. We don't know how much ticket fares we'll get back on them, but it's important to note. And solar panels, obviously, that has a bit of a loan element to it, but that's fine. So some of them are free. Waste management's $36 million. That's a pretty small amount. We can also make most of it back on selling the landfill, but it definitely costs more than that much, I'm sorry to say.
No more questions, my goodness. That's good. Gentleman over here.
Hello, Mark from Pullenvale. What is both your policies on free public transport?
So the Greens have announced that we would like free off-peak for everybody. Last time the Greens campaigned on free off-peak for seniors. Someone said that's not possible, it's not going to do any good. That same someone adopted the policy. So we have free off-peak for seniors now. Free off-peak generally for everybody. What does that mean? That doesn't just mean we're spending money, that also means we're getting more people on buses, less traffic on the road, saves money there. We get people going to more places and spending more money like that, and we support the most vulnerable. So we definitely are behind free off-peak transport for everybody. That is an existing policy of the Greens, and who knows, we can expand that in the future, but council can definitely do free off-peak. Thank you.
I was actually also very happy to see that the LNP had adopted that policy to make bus travel off-peak. And I mean, young people with me will know that we have to take the bus a lot. So we would love for this to be free. Now, as an economics student, I personally believe we should make things almost free, but also have some additional costs. Now, I can't quote you Labour's direct policy on this in this own instance. I can't, but I do seriously want to see a reduction in this because, of course, especially if we are going to be reducing the amount of congestion on Mongrel Road, this would be a great way to get people to use buses more. So thank you for your question. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
One positive thing, just for you, we did look at the costings. A cheaper fee actually will cost you more in the long run than having no fee because of how much it costs to monitor it. Yeah. So there are benefits, but I mean, we did get to the background on that one. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
So if you have a small fee, that is, let's say it's 50 cents or $1, it actually costs more to run the fee-based system, to actually run the scanning machines and whatnot, than it does just to go make it free. So the administrative costs are more than the making it free costs are at that point. Thank you though. Sorry.
If that's the study, then I actually completely agree. And in that case, that's what should be done. I really respect the experts. Thank you.
Thanks. Mike from Anstead. Is it feasible, do you think, to run the City Cat all the way up to Bellbarry as an alternative way around the Moggle Road congestion? Do you know if that would be economic?
My interpretation of this one is that there are two barriers that you need to overcome. One is the size of the boat, and the other is how long it will actually take to get anywhere. So if we did want to feasibly do that type of approach, we would need to make it a smaller city cat, closer to the hopper size, and we probably would need to run it express beyond a Kenmore side. So I think that it is definitely an option to explore. I also do, as I say with everything, I want to see feasibility studies before I actually commit to things entirely. But thank you very much.
I would completely agree. Look, if it was faster than the transport on Moggle Road and it could bring congestion off, it's definitely something I would look into. I haven't seen any feasibility studies on this either, and so I just have Charles' position. Thank you.
My name is Benita Ironside and I live in the Corona Downs, Mount Crosby area, and we've been long-term residents there. I take your point about the congestion on Moggle Road, and this will be a continual problem. I'm sure we're all agreed about that. And I'm wondering what considerations your parties have about moving some infrastructure out of that area. For instance, a high school further out in the western suburbs would mitigate a lot of our transport problems, I would have thought, along with some other better infrastructure further out from Kenmore. So I wondered what your policies were on that.
Well, the first thing to address is that education and placement of schools is a state issue, as we've both addressed. However, I believe it will have to happen eventually in Moggle or a place like this for a new state high school. In that case, it will be council's responsibility to make sure that there is the proper infrastructure to make sure students can go that way, and that will take congestion of Moggle Road as everyone's not just travelling further east to go into the CBD. With this, so I'm largely concerned in council if the state government ever approached us and they wanted to put a new school there. I mean, we've had 8 schools open in Queensland, so it is a possibility. Then it will be council's responsibility, of course, to make sure that the transport infrastructure is in place. Okay.
I can confidently say that the Greens have actually run on this before, a new high school out in Moggle and Bellbarry, so fully behind it. I also am fully behind satellite city models. Satellite city models move employment to more of the fringe areas and have TOD networks that operate between recreational areas primarily centralized in the city. So there is a standard model in urban planning to follow for this. It's already an accepted practice in various parts around the world, and we can definitely start moving certain types of employment out. Council does employ a lot of people itself, but it also does approvals of commercial development, and how we plan those, as well as how we plan the infrastructure around it, will shape where people actually have their businesses. So council has a lot of control through zoning is my answer to that, and yes, that's something to look at.
Follow-up question?
I'd like to ask you your position on a bridge at where the Mogul Ferry is. It's an issue that comes up quite continually. And we do have a public transport system that seems that the bus system ends at Mogul, but doesn't go down to the ferry. And the fact if there was a bridge there, we could actually access Riverview train station. So what's your position on the Mogul Ferry Bridge?
Okay. Well, my statement on that would be, my priority would not be that bridge to even look at in the first place. My priority would be a bridge that would look at linking to rail over at Riverview and Darra. So, generally speaking, people want access to transportation that is actually going to be faster, that they don't have to jump on a bus with intermittent points between. People don't want to wait 15 minutes for a bus, then get off at a bus stop for a train station, and then wait 15 more minutes. Just not feasible. So there is a current proposal for a green bridge near Weeks Road, and it's not good as it is. Its current form is quite weak, but I do also agree that at some point we do need to have a bridge in that general area, probably focused towards the city, but we also do need better connection through Ipswich. My way of addressing that would actually be working with Corunna Downs and Mount Crosby area about public transport linkages to the city of Ipswich as well.
Okay, who's next? Is it you, is it?
No,
Oh.
I understand that the Mogul Ferry Bridge proposal is an extremely controversial issue, and which is, no, it's fair enough, it is. There are serious community concerns, so for this you would need massive community consultation, and if I remember correctly from the previous community consultation, it was rather negative against that bridge. However, there are, of course, and as Charles said, there are proposals. There was a proposal as well to have some kind of bridge, and I remember reading this when I did my work experience over access into the Centenary suburbs to take pressure off Mogul Road. But leading into Ipswich, it's a very controversial issue. It would need this. I don't think should be anything for a councillor to come out and say. This would need to be a community-led decision.
Good evening. I would just like to know how you would go about improving community consultation in the area. Council has an appalling record of community consultation when it actually performs it, which it doesn't do enough. And the second part of that question is, it was identified from 2012 that a community hub was required in Kenmore. Where would you suggest that we put that community hub? So it's been a very definitely identified need. So where would you suggest that we put it?
So what's the first part again?
Well, perhaps you could just answer the question about the community hub, where it needs to go.
I'll do community consultation first, yeah. So broadly speaking, I'm not sure if many of you are aware, but I actually have a master's in development practices, and my master's actually focuses on community engagement. So to me, I might go into too much detail, but I'll try to spare it. It's about involving people at every stage of the planning process. So the planning process has a scoping stage, it has a finalisation stage, and several between. And with each one of those, we need to consult people to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So we've taken their feedback on board, and we need to do it in ways that are not similar to this, where I speak down to you, in a sense, where we speak about while empowering people at tables with butcher's paper, with various formats. So I would suggest people explore just some keywords. Look at something like a World Cafe or participatory budgeting that John already does for his council award spending in the Gabba. That's where people make decisions, not councillors alone. And I just facilitate the process for you to be consulted. So councils are there to be that bridge, but we also should be cementing it in our community engagement cycle And at the same time, we need to make sure that neighbourhood plans are binding. Currently, there's a lot of exemptions and a lot of infrastructure going out at Mogul, so a lot of development going out at Mogul without any infrastructure to keep up with that demand. So that's the first part. I will let you answer the first part before I go to the second one maybe, because otherwise it might get a bit long for me talking.
Sure, that's fine. Although unlike Charles, I think the questions are immeasurably linked to each other. Where do we put a new community hub, and what's a community consultation process? I mean, I've ruled out the Pullenvale Recreation Reserve, but of course, because of the controversy, this is actually the perfect place to have community consultation of where we should put it. Okay, and I know that a lot of sites have been identified. It wasn't just the Pullenvale Recreation Reserve. However, this is when I would, and I'm very supportive of community engagement processes, I would actively try and go out to the community, and I completely agree with Charles. It shouldn't be a matter of me or anyone else speaking down to you. It should be you guys coming and talking to us. I'm in complete agreement in that respect. Thank you.
So actually, just to go on with my trend, I don't like prescribing where things go to people before I've consulted with them. So in terms of where, all I would loosely say is that there's a clear demand for a community centre at the Kenmore end of our ward, so to say, and there's a clear demand for a community centre at the Belbarry end. And I'm committed to $7 million of funding for that in our ward. So we have looked at how we're going to actually cost it into our policies. We've looked at the costing for this, and we are committed to delivering it, but I wouldn't want it premise it before talking to you guys. Thank you.
Hi, it's Carolyn. I've lived in the ward for many, many years. What I'd like to say is I agree with you on your politics, that idea that you want us to vote because we're living here longer than you are, and you might only be in the job for a few years. I mean, we've got to accept reality, the way politicians bump in and out. So I agree with that. One of the things I like to, I'm sorry about this, but the other thing is the hot potato. I'm probably completely in the wrong area here. The question is, thank you. The question is, the old Kenmore bypass, and don't all throw tomatoes at me, the old Kenmore bypass, that land is still gazetted. You were talking about a bikeway from Belbarry. Is there a possibility that a bikeway, busway, taxiway, public transport could still use that corridor to whip into the current roads? We've got the freeways and the shopping centres and things, and actually take some of the traffic out of Kenmore that might be on the through road, but isn't actually overbearing for the locals because it's only a small amount of traffic that would then use it. What do you think the possibility of that is? Nil, probably.
So I actually think that potentially has a lot of merit to it. Though I also, from my understanding, I'm not entirely sure on this, the state has resumed the land, so it might not be something council can do, admittedly. And I think there's a part at the start of your question that you're hinting at. No, but that's the crux of it. I agree that there is a premise for that particularly.
The council could have sway.
Council can certainly have sway on a lot of different things. Yeah.
Well, this is an issue that I've not heard about it a great deal. If it is a matter of state land, it would be a responsibility to go out and if we wanted this changed as a councillor, I'd be really happy to look into it. I have not heard it in my current, in the current consultation I've done. I haven't heard about it. I'd even be interested in talking to you afterwards if you would like. Thank you.
Gentleman in the white shirt down the back.
Arthur Poole. I've lived in the area for about 30 years. This is not just about Pullenvale, but I want to ask a question about urban heat island and specifically trees. It's not going to fix global warming, but it affects the livability of Brisbane. Interestingly, with the Greens candidate here, the only mention we've heard of trees was, I think, from Kate Richards. But anyway, trees do cause a conflict with solar, of course. In the suburbs, you often have a choice of trees versus solar. We, at our place, Chapel Hill, we can't have solar
can you
because we have
switch
such
to
tree
question?
cover.
Yep.
And so one of our neighbours referred recently, used the expression, chainsaw season. What we see is tree cover going through the suburbs, disappearing. Councils can promise to plant trees on parks and footpaths, but very little incentive for citizens to keep trees and to plant trees. And I'd just like to have your views on this. The tree cover
It
in the
needs to be a
suburb.
question, so what is the question?
The question is, what are your views on incentives to encourage citizens to keep and plant more trees?
We need that for the cyclone, certainly.
We had this at our house, worrying about shade coming over onto our solar panels. I will just say there is great environmental benefit anyway by putting up solar panels. And when we talk about trees lost, I believe the greatest threat is mass development. When we talk about people removing a tree here and there, hopefully with council approval, in the scale of things, I do not really think that it sums up to mass development and just the massive loss of habitat and land that we receive here. So I think that the real long-term solution will just be not having unsustainable mass land clearing and development. I think the threat of people cutting down trees to put up solar panels to make them more efficient, I think that's relatively minor. Thank you.
I will somewhat support the fact that I think that threat's relatively minor to some of the other ones, but the bigger threat to me is actually relaxation of council laws around development in places like Moggle, where we're seeing koala habitat get taken out in droves. I know people have mentioned earlier that they are concerned about koala habitat reduction, but people are not batting an eye at the acres getting removed at Moggle. I live next to one of them on Church Road. It's horrendous. Also, you are the first person I think that actually has lived here longer than me. That's the bit I wanted to say for. Slight correction, I have lived here just over 28 years. And I think that is more than all the other candidates have lived in our ward combined. So, a little bit of local knowledge.
Got a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
That's not fair, Charles.
They can figure in 50 years' time.
Yeah, I guess that's fair enough. I mean, I was more taking a small stab at the other two. But, no, I definitely agree that there's a... Oh, you please expand.
My question was really about the lack of incentives for individuals, for households to keep trees. That is, we're seeing tree cover all around the suburbs disappear in chainsaw season. No incentives for people to keep trees.
Yeah, okay. So, I have heard, this is a strange thing, I'm not sure if you've noticed how the effect when you name something, you get more attachment to it. Yeah, everyone does, it's a well-documented thing. So, I think something like a tree catalogue, even though it's a number, you get a bit more attachment to something when you've got that, that registration of it, so we can keep track of it at the same time. A tree register is something that can help. I think that verge planting is something that's already helping. I'm not sure if everyone is aware, but you can currently plant in the verge. That's the land that's the road reserve between the road itself, the footpath is included in this, and your property. You can plant that. So I think encouraging that type of planting, expanding the free trees is something that I would have said, the free native plants that council gives away, but it seems like the LNP is going to adopt that one. But I will let you expand on anything there. I'm not sure if there's much else I can add on the spot, I'm sorry.
Thanks. The gentleman in the green jacket.
Oh no.
I think
No.
Oh.
No, you haven't.
I mean, I can address the question further. I'm not a big fan of when people clear trees. I addressed it in response to the solar panels, how I didn't think that was a particular driving force. Something that I've really seen is just enforcement of existing council regulations. I think that's got a bit lack. It's fine. I mean, I have wondered even about some of the local residential proposals that have gone through just near where I live. So I think, to be honest, if we want to stop some of this tree clearing, not related to solar panels, but just in general within residential properties, actually enforcing existing regulation might do a world of good. That's just a suggestion, but there we go.
So we all love online shopping, and we'll get more and more parcels delivered every day. Very quickly, we're going to have drones flying all over our neighbourhoods. So what are your views from a policy perspective, or just views, about the Pullenvale ward and the access and the ability to have drones flying through our neighbourhood?
Okay. I think this one's interesting. I like the strange ones. I think that there's two parts to this actually. And I'm going to group in things like autonomous driving cars here, because often those types of things where we have Amazon owning the drones, it will create a leakage in our economy, and it will also mean that they get to regulate or tweak how we actually go about it. And what I would like to do is have control over that as a council and the money not going elsewhere. So at some point in the future, it might be advantageous, it might not be, to actually look at buying those drones ourselves, or buying the Australia Post might buy that as well as buying self-driving cars, so that we get control over the ethical conundrums that might come up. I will realise that if I go into that, I'm going to go into a massive amount of detail, but generally speaking, there are ethical conundrums with how we regulate AI and self-autonomous drones as well as cars that we definitely want to be in control of. Please ask more questions so I can get more time on that one maybe, but I'll give that to you.
So, excuse me, I'm just about to launch a toilet roll delivery system by drone. Does that mean that in any way?
No, it's not in conflict with it. It's just the sense, I think, that we definitely need to investigate how we're going to regulate it early, because for it, as well as potentially own it. But I'll let you go.
This is a really fun question.
Yeah,
I like it. This is, of course, it's still really early stages. There is no policy on this road. We're talking about hypothetically. But as we're studying in economics, we have to talk of natural monopolies. And this is where it's usually very good for one organisation to run everything in a particular industry because that's most efficient. This is often why you get governments around the world to run postal services. I mean, you have Australia Post, it's a national industry. And when we talk about drones flying in the air, you will need an extreme amount of coordination. I really think it is a natural monopoly. So I would agree. I think the long-term solution for this would be involvement with councils, involvement with government. But I don't think having a bunch of separate drone organisations flying around, especially when you can't guarantee what they're doing, you don't want them mapping and things like this, it will be the responsibility for councils and governments to step in and take a regulatory role.
Okay, now I think we've only got time for about 2 more questions, so do we have any more?
Oh, God. Hasn't been mentioned, but bring it up. So I have to shout into it, do I?
Can you hear me?
You've got to chew it.
Yes.
I'll chew it then, okay? My name's Jane and I live in Pullenvale, and I'm very concerned about the natural environment in my area. The whole area here used to be very green and there was a lot of natural areas, a lot of habitat for native animals and birds. That's rapidly disappearing. Also, council support for catchment groups was cut quite badly. The rangers that used to regularly go through Moggill Forest Park no longer do. There's a problem with weeds, and there's a problem with the huge decline in native birds, particularly in the area. That's my thing. But I'd just like to hear from both of you how you would try to arrest the decline in that habitat in the area, and what sort of limits you think could be put on development to stop that.
Thank you, Jane, for this question, and I really mean it. I live in Pullenvale as well, and I believe the group you're referring to is the Pullen Catchments group. That actually, I believe it's Pullen Catchments group that runs. And Moggill, yes, and the volunteers. I did it actually with the Scouts. I did some work with them. We all went out. It was lots of fun. I was really heartbroken when we had funds from the Land Care Cup. I think that was under the other government. And somebody who in the past when I was a kid actually, I was going to volunteering with Land Care when I saw it relatively butchered and replaced with the Green Army. I was devastated. I really was. And I live in Pullenvale. I've seen the birds decrease myself, just even over my life as a young child. All these birds, and we live in, we feed birds. It's very lovely where we are, but it is slowly declining. I completely agree. How do I think we can fix it? I think this actually goes back into just enforcing existing council regulations again. This is a really big issue. And actually we talk about wildlife as well. I do wonder sometimes about, people put up a lot of fencing, which I'm not actually sure is in the regulations here for our area. But even if we have fencing or not, we need to make sure that it's controlled and that there are actually paths for animals to go through. I mean, we used to have wallabies in our garden early in the morning. They don't come very much anymore after we've seen a lot of new fences come up. And it's
deer.
Pardon?
Not here. Too many deer.
Too many deer. Well, fair enough. Yeah, they come along that day as well. Anyway, that's my stance on the issue. I was devastated that those groups have cut. Throughout my life, if I keep going in politics, I want to see that restored. I really do.
I will echo that firstly, we need to reinforce and enforce our existing laws. They're being ignored. But the other thing I think we need to do is actually monitor the state of the region. So, for a long time, around, 30 years, we've been supposed to be doing a State of the Region report that reports on the diversity of our ecosystem, so this reports on the state of our ecosystem. And these aren't actually occurring. It's very hard to assess how fast things are declining if we don't actually monitor it correctly. And I think groups such as the ones you've mentioned, as well as the Couple of Witten Catchment Group, which is just the Kenmore Chapel Hillside, are actually generally willing to do the legwork there. They already do things like survey bats, which is amazing. They look at butterfly surveys. All we need to do is empower our local groups, and they will probably monitor a lot of these things for us. So monitoring and enforcing are the two things that I would emphasize about.
Okay guys, it seems like I might have the last question, which is quite unique since I had the first, but one of the questions I'd like to ask are two aspiring politicians. One of the things I've always found in Australia, I seem to think we're a little bit over-governed. What's your position on doing away with one of the levels of government in Australia?
It's a really interesting question, and I mean it. I mean, you have some states out there, United Kingdom is technically a unitary state. They don't have states as much. They might be devolving now into Scotland and England. France is a unitary state. It doesn't have powerful governments, but here in Australia, we are a federation. This is nothing that I'm going to be able to legislate on as a councillor. And actually, I think it's really good to have a balance of power where you have if we're going to have multiple parties in government, then it's good to get them to cooperate through local, state and federal governments. We don't just have one party running the show, even though I think one party recently has been running the show a little bit too much. So, yeah, no, I actually really like the power arrangements and how we have devolved governments. I actually think it works really well.
I will largely echo what you've said and add to that each level of government currently has a purpose. Sometimes it's not clear to public, and that's because the politicians aren't doing a good job of it, but distinctly every level has a different thing that they're supposed to be working on, and sometimes people need a bit more clarity around what that is. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks very much, Dr. Charles.
Well, thank you very much to both of our candidates for attending tonight. I think for those of us in the room, there's a couple of us who've dabbled our toes in the waters of politics as candidates before, and I think we appreciate it's a very major undertaking. And I'd like to echo really what Brendan said to start with, which is there's a certain amount of civic-mindedness that virtually every candidate I've met from every party displays, and I think we've seen that in evidence from our two candidates tonight. So thank you very much for your attendance. I'd also certainly like to thank Brendan for his moderation this evening, and just note that he actually has given up parental duties for this evening to come along and made that commitment to come and help our group with that. Brendan, welcome to this side of the electorate, and thank you very much for your job this evening. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank all of you for taking time to come to what is, I think, a very fundamental part of our democracy. It may seem very small at the local council level. It may seem that we are a tiny fraction of the electorate and we make little difference. But I think this simple cut and thrust of discussion about issues in our area is the building blocks of a proper democracy. I'm really pleased you came out this evening. Please stay and enjoy some refreshments, collar the candidates, and please take care going home safely. Thank you very much indeed.